Good morning. Thank you for coming to the New America Foundation. My name is Peter Bergen. We're delighted to host Congresswoman Jane Harman from California today, talking about a very important issue that she's taking a leading role on, the threat of dirty bombs and how to combat them. Representative Harman has had a distinguished career in public service. She's been in the House since 1993. Astonishingly, she was Deputy Cabinet Secretary to President Jimmy Carter, showing...
That's a comment on my age, just so you all get it.
A graduate of Smith and Harvard Law School. Representative Harman has taken a leading role in reversing some of the Bush-era policies on detention, interrogation, and trial of enemy combatants, document overclassification, regulating bioagents potentially used for bioterrorism, achieving interoperable public safety communications network for first responders. Amazing, we still don't really have that. Representative Harman has to be out of here at 9:45, so we're going to go right ahead with the program. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you to the New America Foundation. If you want to get a subject around terrorism right, talk to Peter Bergen. I figured that out a long time ago, and that's what I do. And if you want to have a hearing on the terror threat and get that right, invite Peter Bergen. So I do that too. And I just happened to notice he wrote a very interesting article recently in Newsweek, which I hope you all read, for two reasons. One, because it was a good article, and two, because everybody should read Newsweek, right? That's just sort of a random comment. I don't know exactly why I said that. I do want to add, before we start talking about this very light subject of dirty bombs, add one thing, and I do view this as a heroic accomplishment, not so much for me, but for Congress, and with a huge assist from my staff member, Meg King, who is sitting here in the pink jacket. 3 years ago, the House first passed something that we call the D-Class Act, or the Overclass Act, which was a bill that had a pretty detailed program for the Homeland Security Department to train people on how to classify information, to declassify information that shouldn't be classified, and to do portion marking. I'm sure you all understand what that means. That means that in a document which has some classified pieces, only those portions or paragraphs that are those pieces would have the right bells and whistles at the front. So it would be easy to eliminate them and have a D-class version of the document and produce that easily. At any rate, we held detailed hearings. I think they're the only ones that Peter didn't testify at, or he would have remembered this. We passed the bill through the House twice. It went to the Senate, where Susan Collins introduced it. Susan is the ranking member on the Senate Homeland Security Committee. And after another whole year of begging that committee to move it, to report it, that was even harder, and finally getting it on the Senate consent calendar, it actually passed the Senate last Monday. And then a miracle happened, which is the House passed the bill with the Senate amendment last Tuesday. That is unheard of. And the real miracle is that tomorrow President Obama is going to sign this bill. So this is a very good thing, I believe. Of course, I'm totally objective. It's a very good thing, and it actually got through this Congress. And when it becomes law, it will contribute something to making it easier to share information, especially vertically, between the federal government and local law enforcement. And this will have a big impact, Peter, on some subjects that we're about to talk about. So I thought you should know. And the other thing that happened at the close of Congress, and President Obama will sign this bill tomorrow also, is that the first intelligence authorization bill in 5 years passed. And it has some very good features in it, one of which I will mention in a moment has to do with a study of radiological materials, but more important than, well, as important than that, is a new framework for better consultation between the White House and Congress on intelligence matters. And that is pretty darned important if you want to have, and I do, robust oversight over our intelligence activities. So, moving along smartly here, let me talk a bit about the subject today, which is hiding in plain sight the threat from unsecured radiological materials. Many of you are very sophisticated in this audience. I've already been warned by Meg, so If this sounds a little simple to you, just understand. As Peter pointed out, I'm very old, and this is as much as I can wrap my head around. The threat of can you hear me? This mic seems a little bit, okay. The threat of a conventional attack, or something like the storming attack, a storming attack similar to the 2008 Mumbai attacks, is much more likely to me, and I think most experts who look at this, than a dirty bomb attack. No one has missed the recent travel alert in Europe. I certainly have not missed it, not only because I follow this stuff, but because my youngest daughter, age 25, and her boyfriend are traveling in Europe at the moment, and a worried mom keeps sending emails at every stop saying, are you paying attention? Are you looking around? Et cetera, et cetera. I think the most helpful advice I saw came from Michael Chertoff, who was on some television program the other day and who said that, and so of course I pass this along, know where the exits are if you go into a public space, know where you might be able to hide, look where the security is. I think this is useful, and I wish our government were putting out more specific information like this, even if we can't provide more information about what country or when. But at any rate, regardless of the fact that there are other kinds of attacks that are more likely, there's no question that the consequences of a dirty bomb attack would be disastrous. And that's why I have been a broken record for years about this, and why I'm here today to raise awareness with a sophisticated audience about this problem, and to encourage President Obama to do much more to address the threat. A dirty bomb, you all know, is a radiological dispersal device, and it is, the way it is put together is as part of a conventional explosive. It's packaged with a conventional explosive. It kills or injures through the initial blast of the bomb and by airborne radiation and contamination. If detonated, the extent of local contamination would depend on a number of factors, including the size of the explosive, the amount and type of material used, the means of dispersal, and weather. The closest to the dirty bomb, those closest to the dirty bomb would sustain the worst injuries and contamination from the explosion. It would kill fewer people, probably, than a conventional blast, but over time, it would kill many more people. So you have to think about this in a time-lapse phase, not just in an immediate phase. It would render many square miles uninhabitable, or it could, for years. For example, let's pick 30, which is the half-life of an ingredient called cesium-137. And many of the sources, like cesium-137, which is a salt-like substance, bind chemically to concrete and asphalt and become lodged in cracks on the surface of sidewalks, streets, and buildings. Cleanup is nearly impossible, and in some cases, demolition is the only way forward. The economic cost, obviously, is huge. It's very hard to estimate because it depends on the material and the location of the attack. But again, remember, contamination lasts decades. Example, I represent the communities around the Port of Los Angeles, which, with the Port of Long Beach, is our biggest container port. Almost 50% of our container traffic travels through those ports. A few years ago, there was a work stoppage because of a labor dispute. The ports closed for 10 days, and the estimated cost, just in commercial terms, was $1 to $2 billion a day. So multiply that by 30 years, or even half of 30 years, or 10 years, or 1 year, and it's just stratospheric economic costs. What keeps me up at night, in addition to my husband, who gets up every 10 minutes to make more notes about his new venture, is the relative ease for making a dirty bomb. It doesn't take much technical expertise because no special assembly is required. It's a crude weapon. And access, as you all know, to radiological materials, especially the highly dispersible kind, like cesium-137, inside America is far too easy. These materials are routinely used in radiological machines inside hospitals and in research facilities for diagnosing and treating illnesses, and in industrial and construction sites, and they are not adequately secured. A few years ago, a number of members and I went to New York City, hosted by the NYPD, and did a tour of 3 major hospitals. We saw their radiological facilities. We noticed that there were no mag detectors as you walk into these hospitals, so someone could walk in with a loaded weapon. All of the radiological machines and the facilities in which they were located were secured in various ways. One had a swipe card, another had bulletproof glass, and so forth. But I don't want to go through all the specifics because I'm not intending to give anybody a roadmap to how to do this. But just trust me. I saw the NYPD video, and it would scare you. And it's not that hard to take the source out of one of these machines, to storm into one of these hospitals, storm into one of these facilities, take the source out of the machine, and put together a crude bomb and explode it, almost immediately before law enforcement can arrive in adequate numbers on the scene. And that's a terrifying idea, especially in the middle of a very crowded metropolitan area. In July, I wrote an op-ed with Senator Susan Collins in which we said that terror groups remain highly interested in getting radiological materials and making these devices. Osama bin Laden has made no secret of his ambition to join the nuclear club. He's even proclaimed it a religious duty for Muslim states to acquire nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons to attack the West. Since 9/11, U.S. officials have recovered many documents detailing al-Qaeda's pursuit of these weapons. In 2006, Abu Hamza al-Muhajir, then the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, called for nuclear scientists and explosive experts to help his organization in making biological and radioactive weapons. And that same year, a British citizen, Diran Barot, pleaded guilty to conspiring to detonate a radioactive dirty bomb. He planned to target underground parking garages in the UK and U.S. institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, the New York Stock Exchange, and offices belonging to Citigroup and Prudential Financial. This summer, Adnan Shukrijuma, an American citizen on the FBI's most wanted list, was named as an accomplice in the Zazi subway bomb plot in New York. Shukrijuma is currently at large. He's a trained nuclear technician allegedly tasked by al-Qaeda with carrying off an American Hiroshima. He once sought nuclear radioactive material from a university in Ontario, Canada. News reports allege that he was intending, when he did this, to construct a dirty bomb. Radiological sources, as I said, within this country are not adequately secured. Add to this the increase in the threat of homegrown terror, something my subcommittee has been watching closely, and there is a recipe for disaster. Okay, so what do? Last week, as I mentioned, Congress passed the first Intelligence Authorization Act in 5 years, and in that act, there is an amendment that I authored requiring the DNI, in consultation with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to produce a report on the threat of dirty bombs, including an analysis of highly dispersible sources. Obviously, a report doesn't get us to a solution, but it certainly will heighten awareness and will update our knowledge on this. The NRC is responsible for regulating radioactive material, and it administers over 21,000 licenses of such materials. The NRC and state regulations require owners licensed to use or store radioactive material to secure it from theft and unauthorized access. Since 9/11, these measures have been strengthened, and licensees must promptly report something that's stolen, and make an effort to try to retrieve it. But I'm sure you would agree that this is a little bit limp given the urgency of the threat. There's also a voluntary program operated by the Department of Energy called the Global Threat Reduction Initiative in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security and the NRC to retrofit machines with biometric access control devices, door alarms, motion sensors, cameras, electronic tamper seals, and training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as I mentioned, I don't know that I saw retrofitted machines, but it just ain't that hard to get this stuff out of machines if you're under 25 and have a facility for understanding just intuitively how these things are put together. The under 25 was, I suppose, just meant to be meant to make my point that if you're over X, it would be very hard for you to do this. But some of you may be able to do such things. A pilot project at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania was completed last year to secure all of its radiological sources. And now 29 other hospitals in the greater Philadelphia area are doing this. But obviously we need to do more. The figure that Susan Collins and I had when we wrote our op-ed, and I think it's right, and this seems to me is what we spend in 10 minutes in Afghanistan, is that at a cost of about $250,000 per building, the U.S. could secure radiological sources at the 500 major metropolitan hospitals in this country. $250,000 per building. That would total $125 million, which probably we spend in an hour in Afghanistan. Securing these sources was not even discussed at the President's recent nuclear security summit, despite the fact that a number of countries, including the Brits and the Germans, wanted it on the agenda. I hope that once this election is over, it will be over. People keep telling me that it will be over in 4 weeks. Time flies when you're having fun. That the House and Senate can get back to work on this subject and find $125 million. The NRC is also working to require the producers of radiological machines to replace dangerous radiological sources with safer ones. We have heard that there is a variation on cesium-137 that is not dispersible. It's a lump, like cobalt-60, and lumps are harder to blow up and disperse. Some of you are nodding, so you obviously know more about this than I do. But that would be good. Wouldn't it be good if cesium-137 in salt form were not used anymore anywhere? Let me just finally conclude with a word about resiliency. Right now, I would suggest that the U.S. is underprepared for a dirty bomb attack. I think we're actually underprepared for a conventional attack as well. Most cities and states will rely heavily on the federal government to conduct and fund improvised nuclear device, IND, or radiological dispersal device, RDD, recovery activities, including analysis and environmental cleanup. This may take time, especially if there are near simultaneous attacks, something that is the trademark of al-Qaeda, as we know. The federal government has provided only limited guidance for state and local emergency preparedness agencies to develop recovery plans as opposed to response plans. The Department of Homeland Security is doing a number of things that are important, like training 15,000 state and local enforcement officials across the country in radiation detection operations. DHS has deployed 3,000 handheld detectors to CBP and 6,500 detectors to the Coast Guard. And DHS has conducted, you probably know this, an exercise on response to a dirty bomb as part of its top-off series. But I would still argue that even if first responders are better prepared, the public is way underprepared. So, in conclusion, I'm inviting you to join my nightmares, but more productively, I'm urging you to help. You can encourage local hospitals to sign up for the voluntary retrofit program run by the NRC, Department of Energy, and Department of Homeland Security. The upgrades are free to hospitals and research facilities because Congress has funded this program. But you can also urge your member of Congress to support an increase in the budgets for radiological material protection. I would argue that $125 million, as I've said, is a very small investment on a much more secure country, and that of the threats I can think of that we could immediately reduce, this one would be on the top of my list. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that Representative Harman raised, also a little bit about the current threat, and also a little bit about Afghanistan and Pakistan. Are you surprised, and we'll, after I've had a little discussion, we'll open up to your questions. Are you surprised there hasn't been a radiological bomb attack in the United States or in Europe? Is that, I mean...
Well, I'm surprised there hasn't been a successful conventional attack in the United States. There have been successful conventional attacks in Europe, as everybody knows. We have both increased the effectiveness of our intelligence and law enforcement operations. Everybody understands that. And we've been lucky. But I also think, for a variety of reasons that I don't fully understand, but I think, Peter, you could explain, the bad guys have either calculated or miscalculated what they want to get done. So, so far, so good. As for a radiological attack, I mentioned it is not hard using the kind of materials that I have described. And there is some security in place. But do I think it could happen? Yes, I think it could happen. And that is why I think it is urgent to do something quite simple, which is, at least in this country, secure the radiological machines in our major hospitals, which would be a logical place where someone would go to try to mount an attack.
Other sources that would be of concern, or hospitals, are just so much more important?
Well, I mentioned research facilities.
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff just doesn't sit around, at least so far as I know it doesn't. And people are aware of its properties. I don't think the folks who operate radiological machines don't get it. I mean, radiological should mean something to those people, but nonetheless, I don't think they're adequately trained or protected, and I don't think the machines are adequately protected, and I think that, as I mentioned, the materials in those machines should be in a form that it's very hard to disperse.
Sure. And what about, I mean, the Bruce Ivins case suggests, one thing you've got to really worry about is an inside job. Would what you're suggesting tend to prevent against that, or is it?
Well, I asked that question in these hospitals. What checks do you make of the radiological techs who work in these facilities? Oh, we do a crime report, and we do this and we do that. Well, excuse me, I think many of the folks who have emerged as some of our homegrown terrorists would pass any of those checks. They have very clean backgrounds. And I don't know how much more could be done with some young recruit, but yes, it could be an inside job.
Right.
That seems to me to be kind of an obvious way to do this.
You had mentioned al-Qaeda's interest in these weapons. I mean, do you think domestic right-wing terrorists in this country have an interest in these kinds of things?
I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
I think there's some suggestion, but that al-Qaeda is not the only game in town.
Al-Qaeda is not the only game in town, and Timothy McVeigh used ingredients that the terrorists use too
Right.
for blowing things up.
Right. Given the fact that you think it's fairly likely that an attack like this might happen somewhere, it may not even be in the United States. I mean, is part of the government's job to explain what an attack might actually entail? Because I think most people would think, not people in this room, but somehow they'd gone nuclear. And of course, this would be not a weapon of mass destruction. It would be a weapon of mass disruption with some serious consequences,
yeah.
but not. Does the government need to do a better job about explaining what, or does that just play into a sort of climate of fear?
Well, this is always the problem. I think the government has to do a better job. I think we're not doing a good enough job of explaining the European scare.
Yeah.
And people don't know how to respond. I think if you're going to say, keep traveling to Europe, but oh, by the way,
freak out.
Yeah. A train station may blow up, and a train station in which you are may blow up. You ought to offer people more specific guidance, and that was my point about Chertoff. He's the only guy I've heard on the airwaves who actually had some specific suggestions. I haven't heard any of our government officials make any specific suggestions, and I think that I think there's room for improvement. And the same thing on a dirty bomb. I think nobody understands, or very few people. Everybody in this room understands it, but most other people don't understand it and what the consequences of it are. And as I mentioned, there'd be a smaller loss of life, but there would be a longer contamination problem. That would obviously happen with a nuclear weapon too. But that longer contamination problem is a huge problem. And if the only way to get cesium-137 out of the sidewalks of Midtown Manhattan is to destroy things, that is quite disruptive. Think about it. A lot of people live right there, including most of my kids. So this is really on my mind. And oh, by the way, it might not just be hospitals in major urban areas. I mean, these radiological ingredients are in hospitals not in major urban areas. So there is I don't want to be more specific, and I don't want to be alarmist, but I see this as a serious problem and one that we really can do something about immediately, unlike some other problems.
Yeah, for relatively small amounts of money. You mentioned the terror threat. I mean, what do you think prompted the State Department to produce this rather vaguely worded? I mean, was there some is there some fire under the smoke? I mean, to what extent?
No, I think this is a real threat. I mean, I'm not going to reveal what I learn in classified briefings, but I have them all the time. As you know, I chair this subcommittee on intelligence of the Homeland Security Committee. And the chatter was up, and the training is up, and there just is increased reason to believe that some folks are trying to pull this off, either in Europe or here. And, of course, worrisome to me and you is that Westerners are training in these camps. That is a well-known public fact. And that these Westerners, many of them have clean travel documents. This is sort of the new MO. And those that are Europeans also can travel here on the visa waiver program, something that most of you know, something that concerns many of us. I'm not for throwing it out, but I sure hope we are being very careful in how we use it. So I think at some point somebody made the decision, and I don't know who that was, that we had to get out more information to the public. I just wish that information had included what to look for and what to do. I always think that should be part of the information that goes to law enforcement and to the public. Sending mixed messages gets everybody confused, and that I think this warning has led to more confusion than was necessary.
Do you think that in the light of the Christmas Day 2009 essentially failure, that the government, I mean, there is a sort of element of, well, we have this information in the system, we don't really know what it means, it's kind of vague, it's not clear what country or who was really involved, but we're going to have to put it out there because if anything did blow up, it would come back and warn us.
Well, that's the CYA factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to use CYA. But
I just used the acronym. I don't know what it means. Maybe. But I'm in favor of informing the public in a constructive way. I think empowering people is a good idea. I mean, again, let's think about threats in local communities. I don't think 435 members of the House of Representatives are the best people to find to prevent and disrupt the next terror plot in Los Angeles. I would think a fully informed, or as fully as we can inform, local police and first responder community plus a public that's on the lookout is much more likely to find something weird than I would be. And let's just think about the Shahzad plot, the Times Square bomber plot. I mean, that was two guys in a T-shirt, running a T-shirt stand who noticed the smoking car. It wasn't even the police, although the police response was excellent. And then the layers of government came in afterwards, and the response was very good. But let's understand, those are the folks who are going to find this. And it's not going to be me, and it's probably not going to be 40,000 FBI agents either. And I bet it's not any one of you in this room, not to disparage you, but it probably isn't, unless your next-door neighbor is doing this and you notice it.
Should the standard be, I mean, just as a general principle, you receive intelligence briefings about the threat. I mean, if you knew something that was of concern to your kids and you called them up, surely that would be, at that level, the government in some way should make public what the threat level is. Do you see? I mean, so if a government official has information that would be of concern to their own family, then surely the standard should be also made available to the public.
That's an interesting point. I haven't thought about that. I'm very careful with how I use any information that I get. But you can appreciate, since most of my kids live in New York City, that anytime I hear anything about subways and train stations in New York, my personal awareness level goes way up. But you're right. If I'm going to warn, if it's appropriate to warn my kids, I've got to warn your kids too.
Right.
And again, the warning should be put in a way that's useful to people, not just oh my God, they're coming.
Right. On Afghanistan and Pakistan, you've recently been in the region, and there's a report today in the Post about what seems to be for the first time the Quetta Shura really talking to the Afghan government directly. How do you see? Well, let me ask you first of all, how do your constituents see what's going on in Afghanistan? Are they fed up? Are they?
Well, it's interesting. I think most of them don't think about it, at least not at the moment. They're mostly focused on whether their house is going to be foreclosed and they're going to keep their job or get a job. I mean, it is really true once you get out of this bubble that is what everyone is talking about in America. And that is what, as a representative of 700,000 people, I need to be not just talking about, but working on. And I am working on it. So they pay very little attention to this right now. But they will tune in again, I think. And I think the first thing they're going to notice is how much this war is costing us. $100 billion, I think it's about $120 billion a year for Afghanistan only is unsustainable. And that is something that I've been saying for years. I've actually said it directly to David Petraeus, and I think that when it comes time to renew this amount of money, or I don't think anyone's going to propose increasing it, but I think that pot of money is not going to be sacrosanct, and people are going to look at it in terms of, the immediate threats to America, our security, are coming from some homegrown terrorists, from people trained in Pakistan and maybe inspired or trained in Yemen, not from Afghanistan. I mean, people put this pretty simply. Why are we betting the farm on Afghanistan? So I think there is a lot of impatience with this big pot of money being spent there. And I also think that as the casualty rate goes up, and I understand what David Petraeus is saying, that to make progress, we have to take some risks in what is a really fierce firefight in some parts of Afghanistan, particularly the south. We're going to lose more people, and so is NATO, and so are the Afghans. But people are going to tune back in. Anyway, what is my bottom line here? I think that our strategy should change. I think it is unsustainable, and I think that we should be talking about a reduction in troops over a time period. Not everybody out by July of 2011, but we ought to get on with that conversation. And I think this news, which I read in the Post this morning too, I was not aware of it, and I don't know how major these conversations are. I mean, it said, my newspaper, our newspaper said, we actually still have a hometown newspaper. We ought to rejoice, folks. If you read the New York Times today, there's a front page story about the LA Times. That's my old hometown newspaper, which is disappearing into bankruptcy, which is really sad. But at any rate, back to this. If Mullah Omar is involved and the Quetta Shura is involved, and this is a very high-level conversation, and it is about ending hostilities with Pakistani buy-in, this is something we should take a serious look at. 2 points. One, that makes me very happy that David Petraeus is there, because he is going to have a very, seems to me, sober view of this. And if he thinks these talks are worth doing, I'm going to be pretty comfortable that we're doing this right. That's one. But two, I think you all saw this if you read the article, the Haqqani Network is not part of this. The Haqqani Network, and the article said something about the Haqqani Network with its strong ties to the ISI, the Pakistani Intelligence Service. The Haqqani Network is the group that seems to be operating out of a sanctuary, a city in the tribal areas called Miran Shah, where the Pakistanis don't attack. But that network has about 40,000 fighters, in fierce, very well trained fighters in Afghanistan. And if they're not part of these talks, they may be able to sabotage this, or possibly they may be surrounded by peace agreement that will marginalize them. I don't know where it's going, but my initial reaction is it's something we ought to be taking seriously.
One question that seems to have got lost in all this is, what is the moderate Taliban? What are the kind of, particularly as it relates to women? We haven't heard much discussion of this issue at all in all the discussions, whether from the left or the right. It seems to have got lost to the idea that the Taliban have reprehensible social policies which they would seek to bring back.
Well, attention must be paid. I certainly haven't forgotten about the issue. And I noticed recently that Karzai made some appointments which included women. This point has been made to him, I think, every third hour. And I don't know what his personal predilections are, but I think the world community is not, well, at least one member of Congress is not, but I also think the world community is not going to bless an agreement that takes women back to the Stone Age. Understand that it is not only the Taliban that has some views about the role of women in Afghanistan that I personally view as abhorrent, and it's not only Afghanistan that does some of these things. But nonetheless, if we're part of this, if we're part of helping to broker or bless some form of agreement there, I cannot imagine that it would permit the harshest parts of Sharia law to be reimposed. I would personally oppose that strongly.
Just one final question. Both General Petraeus and the administration, although not directly, have been playing down this December review, which, after all, was one of the things that was promised as part of the package that included the surge. Do you think Congress will forget about the December review?
No.
Do you think the media will forget about it?
No. And
do you think Petraeus will be summoned for hearings?
I don't know why they're saying that. I mean, maybe that's what they believe. I also saw Obama said a few days ago that he's sticking with the current strategy. But there is a NATO meeting in November. I think this thing will come to a head in November. One of our selling points is that this is a truly international effort. It is certainly true that the fighting force doesn't have 100 countries in it, but it does have a number of countries. Example, I was in Georgia recently, the country of Georgia, and they have about 700 or 800 soldiers there, but they're offering thousands more. And the day that I was in the country, this was part of my trip, they had just lost their first soldier, and we were there as the soldier's body was received, and I was glad we were because we could pay respects to a country that is stepping up to be helpful. But I think that keeping the larger coalition together matters. It matters in terms of how this whole effort is perceived, and if they start going south, that will force a change in the strategy. And I'm not sure, but I just bet that this notion of a timetable for reducing the military presence is going to come up in November at the NATO meeting, which is in Europe. It's in
Lisbon.
Lisbon, yeah.
Thank you. Questions, if you could identify yourself and your affiliation. We have a microphone. If you could wait for the microphone, come forward here and take some of these over here. Yeah, thanks.
William Seymour, Fair Observer. Just first off, thank you very much for speaking to us today. And just a quick two-part. One, just quickly, as for the hospitals in the D.C. area, have any of them upgraded? And is there a way that we could, if not, is there an easy way to encourage them? Or
yeah, there is. That was part of my call for action. I'm sure we can tell you specifically what this program is. I can't. What's the name of it, Meg? What's the name of the program?
It's the Office of Global Threat Reduction.
The Office of Global Threat Reduction at the Nuclear Regulatory, at the Department of Energy. The Office of Global Threat Reduction at the Department of Energy is running this program. And the easy way to find out if our local hospitals are in is just to ask. And if they're not, the next move is to encourage them to be in this program, which will help secure their materials.
Oh, that's great.
And is already funded. I still think we need the $125 million program on top of this to make sure all 500 hospitals are much more secure. I mean, I'm not saying there's 100% security as long as there are radiological materials in hospitals, but there will be a much higher level of security if we can do this.
All right. Just point of concern because I live right next to a hospital. So, and then my main question is in reference to what you said about women's rights in Afghanistan with the possible negotiations with the Taliban. What way would there? I mean, it seems like it would be very hard to keep a tight hold on this because once the U.S. leaves and we don't have a direct influence there, it'd be very easy for them to sort of, over the course of maybe a year, or if they're clever, 3 or 5 years, to just kind of bring everything back to where it was. Is there a way that we can structure the agreement to make sure it stays the same, or that we could kind of keep a progressive eye on things as they develop? Thank you.
Well, I'm not talking about leaving. I'm talking about reducing our military presence over a small period of years. with maybe a residual military presence. Think Iraq. We have 50,000 troops on the ground there to protect us and to protect, to offer and to continue to train their troops. So I'm talking about having a continued military presence, but I'd like to surge, as has been recommended, development and diplomacy in the country, not just U.S. development dollars, but Afghanistan has resources. Let's understand, we just learned about their $1 trillion of mining resources, which hopefully they can exploit in a non-corrupt way. I know that may be a bridge too far, but just think about that for a moment, park that thought. But they also they were a breadbasket. There's a lot that can be done there to develop Afghanistan, and why shouldn't the U.S. be part of that? And again, development, especially development that includes women as entrepreneurs, changes things. So I don't see this as a static situation. I would think going forward we could change the climate in Afghanistan, bring it into a world community in more ways than it is now. And this problem of women being abused and of honor killings and stonings and mutilation and all of that is a problem worldwide. And Nick Kristof and his wife have written a book about this, as gender crimes as the civil rights crime of our present age, and they make a very compelling point. And I think this is something we have to pay attention to around the world, not just in Afghanistan. I'm not minimizing the problem in Afghanistan, but I'm saying this is a huge problem that deserves our attention.
Great.
Hugh McElrath, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Could you generalize a little bit from this point, the larger point you've made, about how we align threat responses with threat assessments? We seem to pile on the last incident, the reaction to the last incident, and then there may be something that's actually a greater threat and could be addressed relatively cheaply, but it gets short shrift.
Well, that's a great question, but don't give up the mic, because I want to know whether your lab, you said you work in a lab, has radiological, would you answer that first? What are you doing about the radiological materials in your lab?
We're the former Hanford, so yeah, we're your friendly local plutonium factory. We haven't made any since 1986. But yes, there is an expertise in nuclear materials. That's not my field, but I'm interested.
Okay, friendly, great answer. So yeah, we're very good at fighting the last war. And what we do is we layer up against the last problem. And we face a resilient, agile foe. We face resilient, agile foes. It's not one. It's a loose horizontal network of bad guys and girls who are looking to exploit us. But they are trying to attack us asymmetrically. So they're watching what we do. And if we harden this, they're going to move to that. We should understand that. And we're not good at not only thinking like they do or outthinking them, but we're also not good at empowering people to outthink them and think ahead. It's a challenge. We're getting a little better. A number of articles were written on the 9th anniversary of 9/11. I can think of one by Fareed Zakaria in Newsweek that basically said we overreacted to 9/11, and we've done things that may not, we've done some things that keep us safer, but we've done some things that may actually make us less safe. I want to say, let me be clear, 9/11 was a horrific assault on America in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and economically. So I don't want to downgrade anything that happened there. But looking at our response, with the benefit of some years, is the world safer? I would say no, it's not. And can we be smarter about this? Yes.
Representative Harman, following up on that, it seems another threat that isn't a Chicken Little scenario is a surface-to-air missile bringing down a commercial airliner.
Absolutely.
We saw that in Mombasa, a fairly narrowly run thing with an Israeli charter jet, where al-Qaeda tried to bring it down with a surface-to-air missile. A DHL plane in Baghdad was clipped by in 2003. These guys have surface-to-air missiles. They have an intended capability. Obviously, if you could bring down, it doesn't even have to be an American jet, some form of passenger jet, somewhere in the world, you've had a somewhat transformational effect. To what extent, I mean, has your committee thought about retrofitting American passenger jets? I know it's very expensive. You obviously have this discussion.
It's not our committee,
Okay.
but this issue has been raised
Right.
by a number of people in Congress. I think it's Senator Barbara Boxer in particular who has been talking about this for years. And I think the cost is $1 million a plane to put the right avoidance equipment on the airplane, and for commercial airplanes. And I don't think any progress has been made. And I think you are absolutely right to raise it again, Peter, because I think it is a threat here and it is a threat internationally, and it would send a huge message and be perceived, in the B-roll for the bad guys as a enormous victory. So we need to do everything we can to reduce the possibility that they will succeed.
And sort of a similar question. The guy who built the bomb that was on Northwest Flight 253 that could have blown up over Detroit, and he also built the same bomb that almost killed Prince Mohammed bin Nayef.
And he's still at large.
He's still at large. Yeah. So what can be done about that, given the fact that he may be trying, as we speak, to build a plastic explosive bomb to put on a flight that's not detectable by metal detectors?
Well, I'm not going to reveal anything I learn in classified briefings, but attention is being paid to that guy and Anwar al-Awlaki and others who are at large in Yemen. And the Yemeni government is cooperating. This is a threat to Yemen as well. Let's understand that.
You've visited, right?
I did. I visited earlier this year. And it was very interesting. I mean, that is one of the poorest countries on earth. I was just in Sana'a. I don't know how many of you have been to Yemen? Well, that's a large group. And you may have been outside the city. It's quite something. It has a sort of mud architecture, and most of the men wear ceremonial swords, and they're carrying this narcotic cot on their shoulders. And by the way, I'm told Yemen is running out of both fuel resources and water, and the water that they have is being devoted to growing the cot. So this is not a recipe for growth and a future. But the government is well aware, and there are certain civil wars going on inside the country, but the government is very aware of this terror threat, which threatens them too. And we are trying to be helpful there. And these folks that are at large are a big threat to world security. And I hope that they are captured or, if necessary, killed.
One of the guys who leads al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is a Guantanamo releasee.
Yes.
Yeah. Where are we on the Guantanamo issue?
Well, I've been to Guantanamo about 4 or 5 times. How many of you have been to Guantanamo? Well, a few more, yes. It's a very hard problem, not that anyone has missed it. I strongly favor closing that prison, closing it, not keeping it open for a long period. Obviously, it's a harder problem than the Obama administration thought to dispose of the cases of the people who were there. But I would favor having all of them, those who can't be released. And, oh, by the way, I think it was the Bush administration that reviewed the record of this particular fellow and judged that he could be released. And unfortunately, it was a bad call. I assume people carefully looked at his record, but it was obviously a bad call. But I think these folks should be tried by a variety of means. But my first choice is Article III courts. They work. 400 people have been tried and convicted of terror-related crimes since 9/11. These new military commissions don't work. They're untried. There are only 3 or 4 of them. I don't think we should throw them out. But if we can't perfect them, and if every procedure they want to use is a subject of another, of more litigation up to the Supreme Court, I think that's an unproductive route. I think military courts may fit a few of these folks. But we should move on with this and make the best calls we can and show the world that we do abide by the rule of law and that we that trying to set up a prison outside the reach of U.S. law was a mistake. And one final point. In Afghanistan this time, I was at Bagram Air Force Base, where we have a newly constructed prison which holds a number of people we have recently detained. And we are following the Geneva Conventions, and I'm told that the interrogations of these people are very productive. So there is a right way to do this.
Do you think Khalid Sheikh Mohammed should go on trial in either Manhattan or some district in the United States?
I think we should try him. Yes, I do. And I don't know, I mean, that's not my call where
Right.
he should be tried.
But a civilian trial, not a.
I
a
think
criminal.
an Article III court would fit this.
Right.
I mean, we just had a successful outcome yesterday with Zazi. He was tried and convicted, and is going to serve a life sentence without parole. If we certainly have I would think a very strong case against KSM and these high value targets. And if you've been to Guantanamo, I really can't justify letting people like that, although they're under high security, be in a kind of paradise and have a fairly comfortable life after allegedly committing the most heinous crimes we have observed, or I have, on U.S. soil in my lifetime. I don't think it's okay. And I think we should get to resolution here. And that would be, I think, my recommended route. I'm not saying it's the only route, but we ought to decide how to dispose of his case, and he ought to be tried. And I am quite certain he will be convicted and either be sentenced for life or sentenced to death, depending on what the procedure is and what the request of the jury is, if it's a jury trial or whatever. And I think that will send the right message.
Indeed. In the back here.
My name is Samar Chatterjee from Safe Foundation. Senator, you did point out something that Michael Chertoff said as specific. I would like to take a little objection to it because he did say something specific, but if you do what he said is find escape routes when you are in a foreign country as an American citizen and looking around for what places you can escape from, you could get into trouble with the local law enforcement. You've got to do it in a very, very astute and very civilized manner. And even some local people can pounce on you thinking you're a terrorist. Why are you looking for a place to escape and so on? And you can't go around asking people, what's the escape route here and what do I do? So I think he's a Republican. He's trying to drum up business because he's chairman of a security firm. And I hope the present government isn't giving him a lot of contracts anyway.
Well, okay, but let me say that I'm not just interested in protecting Americans from these attacks. Let's understand that a lot of these attacks kill more Muslims than they kill non-Muslims or Americans. A lot of the attacks all over the world. You make an interesting point. I don't think Michael Chertoff is advising people on how to build exits from public squares, but nonetheless, I think that some European governments are also warning of this threat, and I know the Japanese are warning. They're tourists of this threat, or at least I read that. I think that it is important for anyone, not just Americans, in a large mass of people to figure out what to do if in the event that you have to get out of there in a hurry. I do think that's a useful strategy, and it occurs to me, I don't think about it. I go to mass sports events, and there I am, in the bleachers someplace, and I don't really know what I would do. I just think we have to be more aware in this new world. I think we have to be more aware when we take subways. I think we have to be more aware when we're in airports and train stations. All of us have this responsibility. If we, well, I think we can't do that. You can't avoid masses of people. But I think being more aware I would stand by what I said. I think I wasn't doing this to I know Michael Chertoff, and I respect Michael Chertoff, but I'm not promoting his firm here. What I am promoting is sensible advice to people to know what to look for and what to do in a more dangerous world. And I wish our own government right now we're giving more sensible advice to people to know what to look for and what to do.
By the way, Representative Harman, how does the fact that, it's been widely reported that a number of Germans have showed up in the tribal areas recently, and AP has said 100 to 150 Westerners have traveled there. We know Faisal Shahzad, Najib al-Azazi got training. At the same time, it's also public knowledge that there have been something like 120 drone attacks in that area. How useful does it appear as a deterrent that these drone attacks are at record levels, yet people are still going for training? And I guess a sort of subpart of that is Faisal Shahzad was in Waziristan for 40 days, according to his own plea agreement, when he pled guilty. He only got 5 days of training, which I think does perhaps suggest that some interruption has happened. But the drones, are at a record level, yet people are still going for training.
Well, I'm not going to comment on the drone program. I'm not. I will say that I have seen in a variety of ways, for a variety of actions that our government is involved in, and I'm not going to comment on whether we're connected to the drone program. A huge effort to avoid civilian casualties. Yeah. I think the claims of civilian casualties that come from U.S. Military or intelligence efforts are exaggerated. I really think that they are. I don't know what level of training is necessary to make somebody capable, but I'm very pleased that he only had 5 days of training because he wasn't capable. And I also think, at least from what I read, the explosives that he bought for his, he had 3 different bombs in his car. He downgraded the type of explosives he bought in each case, or so I read. I think it's a fire drill. Right. Or class is out. He downgraded the type of explosives he bought in each case because he didn't want to be discovered. Yeah. And that's good. Yay for us. That means that our efforts to police this stuff are working. And because he bought a lower grade of explosives, they didn't explode. And he wasn't very skilled. So you can say part of this was luck, but part of this was effective law enforcement tradecraft, I think.
Yeah, in front here.
I'm Jonathan Medallia with Congressional Research Service.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for all you do. Your
Thank
products
you.
are very useful.
I appreciate that. The nuclear
this better be an easy question after I say that.
It is.
Oh, okay.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission issued orders to increase controls on radiological materials, as you know. One requirement is that people granted unescorted access to certain radiological sources need a background investigation and approval by their employers. I've spoken with radiation safety officers at several universities and hospitals, and they complain bitterly about this requirement because they're often done by human resources officers, and there are no standards for what disqualifies someone from access. A felony conviction, a bankruptcy, DWI, no one knows. Is a clearance of this sort something that the U.S. government should do instead of having human resource people at universities and so forth do? Thanks.
Well, that doesn't sound very sophisticated, if you're right, in how it's being implemented. I think we would all agree with the point of it, but if it's not being done carefully and competently, I think some work needs to be done. I don't know whether the government needs to run all of these things. We've been going through this with airport checks, with the TWIC program, which is the credentials program for people on ports, trying to upgrade these things, make sure the questions are focused on whether these people are terrorists, not how many times they've been married and whether they used a false ID to get into a bar when they were 17 and whatever. But yes, these check programs need to be upgraded. I'm not ready to say, because I don't know enough about it, whether the government has to run every single one. But I certainly think these programs have to work well, or they make no sense.
In front here.
Scott Towsley with DNDO, DHS. It seems to me one of the asymmetries in an RDD is how do you handle the long-term response? How clean does it have to be? How do we follow the people that were exposed? All that sort of stuff. is there anything we can do to look at the legal regulatory framework for how we would have to respond before we create it on the fly?
Well, good question. You would probably know better. My guess is we should do something. If we don't figure out better policies on the front end, we're going to have worse policy. Every one of you should understand this. One of my standard speeches, which you haven't been subjected to today, is that we blew the opportunity after 9/11 to have a public debate about a new legal framework around all of our policies related to the terror threat. We blew it. Nobody asked for it. The Bush administration proceeded basically under the authorization to use military force plus the president's Article 2 commander-in-chief authorities and kept Congress and the public out. The Obama administration has not, in my view, invited a public debate either. They've been continuing the AUMF basis for their policies by the most part, and Congress still has not been part of, and the public hasn't been part of, a big public debate. Why does this matter? Exactly for the reasons that you say. If we had a public debate and got buy-in to a new set of policies where, as I think everyone would agree, both security and liberty are protected. They're reinforcing values. It's not a zero-sum game. We've really got to think about both. I think we would have an easier time, one, proving to the world that we do operate under the rule of law, but two, actually doing that, accomplishing that. So I hope we get on with it, and I do think that managing the consequences of this could be a mess and could be a huge burden on both economically and personally on people who live in an area where there was a dirty bomb explosion if we don't think it through ahead of time. So since you work there, I am now charging you personally with fixing this problem.
And back here. Oh, thanks.
Philip Maxon, the Nuclear Strategy Non-Proliferation Initiative here at the New America Foundation. I have a question on attribution. The National Academies came out with a report a month or so ago, 2 months ago, on the capabilities of the U.S. to determine where nuclear or radiological material came from if it, heaven forbid, did explode. I wonder if you could speak to, if something did happen, how would we determine where the material came from and then who was behind it and where they got it?
Well, I think attribution is a very important weapon. If people understand that if they try to pull something, we're going to find them out and respond, it's a deterrent. And I think it's one of our better weapons. Technically, how we do that is, well, I'm not sure. I don't know that we want to have a public discussion about that, actually. But I think that the idea of doing that, and you probably know a lot about it, maybe you want to say a few more things about it, but I want to be a little careful because I want people to worry about how much we know about this. But how we do this, whether to do this is a no-brainer to me. Yes, we should do it. And should we strongly respond against those who would provide materials? Absolutely. It's hard to do. I'm sure that's part of your point. We still haven't absolutely figured out who was the perpetrator of the anthrax attacks, as an example. That's not nuclear, but we think we have got this figured out. But it's very hard, especially if it comes from inside the United States. It's very hard, and there are the civil liberties issues that are related to this. But I could have said this. I think attribution is one of the bigger tools in our toolbox. Do you want to say anything more about it, about how you think it should be done? No.
Well, just a quick technical question. Would it be, my understanding, a nuclear explosion is relatively easy to attribute compared to some other kinds. So radiological attribution, would that be very hard?
Well, that would be my question of where would we determine not exactly the material, but where exactly the material came from. Was it domestically produced or was it produced overseas? I'm not sure exactly. I don't have the science background to understand completely. Someone in this room may have more experience in that. But how would we attribute if it's domestically or if it's made overseas, and then how would it get here, that sort of thing?
Would it be harder for radiological is a question than nuclear?
The answer to that is
I'm
yes,
not sure exactly.
Because a lot of that stuff is here. It's in these machines.
Right.
A dirty bomb, I said at the beginning, is a very crude weapon. It ain't hard to put together. And if you did it on the site of where you took, you took the material out of a machine and then, I'm not explaining this, created the weapon and detonated the weapon quickly, it would be obvious where you got the stuff from. But the effects of it would be difficult. And yeah, who would you blame for that? That's tricky because if these, right at the moment there are no penalties for what I think are fairly undersecured sources in these hospitals. We need to up that. We need to make change, as I've been saying for a while here, have materials in the machines that are not easily dispersed, and we have to secure the machines better and secure the hospitals better, and there is a way forward on that. So I think in terms of attribution, I suppose the hospital could pay damages for this kind of stuff, but that would be a pittance compared to the impact of it.
We've just got a few more minutes left, so I just want to bunch questions together, and one in front here, one here.
Good morning, Representative. Carlos Cortez, Customs and Border Protection.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
It's getting better, a lot better.
We're trying. And this question is towards that end.
Uh-huh.
One question, Representative. In dealing with our foreign counterparts, particularly the Brits and the French and others who have dealt with the terrorism problem for decades, they have put and enforced rules, regulations, and protocols in their major cities that are effective. Places like London, where you have a great deal of enforcement, as well as participation by the local public in that enforcement. Are we taking these lessons and implementing them, or are we in the United States thinking that we need to somehow reinvent the wheel when we have colleagues and friends around the world who have dealt with the problem, have had some success, some level of success to it, and yet we're discussing issues that they've addressed, but we've never sat down with them to actually learn?
Well, actually, we do sit down with them. There's an enormous amount of exchange, both at the law enforcement level and at the intelligence level, and a lot of cooperation. I don't know that there's one size fits all for practices. People are used to different things. London has a camera in every corner, and they can find in an hour, it seems to me, anytime they have a problem with their subway or whatever, they have instant pictures, which is very impressive. I don't think we have anything like that, or we have public support for that. They're also a tiny little island, and all of their law enforcement and intelligence types know each other and grew up together. So they have they have a huge Pakistani Brit population that goes to Pakistan for a summer vacation every year and so forth. So they have a specially focused threat. The Germans have a different set of issues, and by the way, their laws are less stringent than ours. And the French, again, approach it differently. But I think in answer to your question, whether best practices are being reviewed and we are learning from our friends, maybe we're not learning fast enough, but yes, best practices are being reviewed. And let's not leave out the Israelis. A lot of Israelis are being called on to help with airport security. They're very good at this. And a lot of airports have former Israelis as their in their senior executive corps, U.S. airports. And we've talked to Israelis about fencing and about screening passengers and et cetera, et cetera. Of course, some of this is backfired. There were some problems in Pennsylvania recently where a contract was let and the practices were too intrusive and it was an embarrassment. But I think we are trying to learn from others. And on your specific specialty, I certainly hope that there's cooperation. Your question implies that there isn't? There isn't?
None whatsoever.
Well, that's not okay. Okay.
From my perspective, there is. Now, the question is more akin to the actual law enforcement outside the federal realm for us, from Customs and Border Protection, in the local populace, in major cities like New York and Washington, where we still feel that there could be some assistance rendered to us by there being a more robust presence from an enforcement perspective that would feed back into your...
Well, okay. I hear you. Point taken. There needs to be. Your function is absolutely critical. I mean, we can secure all the airports and ports we want, but if our borders are porous, it ain't going to work.
Thank you. I'm Diane Perlman with the Institute of Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason. You mentioned
one more.
Yeah.
You mentioned that some of the policies have possibly made us less safe, and the importance of policy. And wondering about much of what we're doing is dealing with the symptom, which we absolutely have to do, and it's very important. But I'm wondering also about dealing with some of the causes and working on addressing the underlying conflicts, tension reduction, reducing desires for revenge, things that might influence recruitment. And what's being done in those realms.
Maybe that's a good closing question.
It's a very good closing question.
Because rather than have you all go out and have more nightmares and think, oh dear, no one really is going to get to the bottom of this. There's certainly, you may know more about this than I do, but I do think about this. In the end, what we have to do is win the argument. We can play whack-a-mole all we want, and I think in some cases we have to do that. And certainly there are people way beyond rehabilitation. That's what I think. And capturing or killing them is what we have to do with those people, period. And they shouldn't go to reform school in Saudi Arabia. They're just not, it's not going to work. But for the next generation of kids trying to decide what to do with their lives, think the problem we have in our inner cities too. We have to have an argument for them that is a better narrative than strapping on explosives and going to heaven, or allegedly going to heaven, and devastating their families. And I think a lot of work is being done on this. Abiding by our values is a huge recruiting. We're not recruiting them, but it's a hugely good narrative, and we have to do better. That's why we have to close Guantanamo and try these folks and show that the rule of law works. Development is a huge narrative. Offering them a way out and a way up is a huge narrative. Having moderate Muslim voices speak out is a huge narrative. There's a fantastic new movie that I just saw, a short documentary that was made by someone named Carrie Lumack. She lost her mother on one of the Boston planes in 9/11, and she and a lot of the other 9/11 survivors have been very constructive since. And I saw this yesterday, and it is a narrative basically done by the groom of the marriage in Amman that was blown up by a suicide bomber. This was a Muslim marriage in Amman, Jordan, 5 years ago or so. And a suicide bomber, Muslim suicide bomber, walked into the Marriott Hotel and blew this thing up, and 3 of the 4 parents were killed. The groom and bride survived. But the groom, a guy named Ashraf, has now made it his mission to travel around the world, talk to kids in madrasas, and talk to people in Indonesia where the Bali was bombed, and so on and so forth, about why doing this is inconsistent with the reading of the Quran. And this documentary, which is in several languages, is spectacular. And I am doing my maximum best to make sure it's going to be shown in Pakistan, and it's going to be shown in Afghanistan, and through means that are appropriate, not as a U.S. government product, because it's not a U.S. government product. I don't want it to appear as though it's our propaganda. But I think things like that are the way, in the end, that not we will win. I think we should retire that terminology, but that this era of terror will end. That's what we want to happen. And it's going to take a lot of layers of capability, starting with improved intelligence and law enforcement against people who are can't be rehabilitated. But then the next layer is a system of laws that does anticipate what could happen and that protects both security and liberty. Otherwise, we're going to lose both. And then it takes another layer, which is something we are good at, which is developing an alternative narrative. We're very good at that in this country. We're very good at hope. We're very good at generosity. This is what has made America a mecca for so many years. And if we can figure out that, I think then this enormous problem will be effectively dealt with. And wouldn't it be nice in our soon lifetimes to think that this was a horrible post-Cold War scourge in the world. But we found the keys and we ended it. So I'd like to close on that note because I certainly hope for a better and more secure world for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.